Good morning and welcome to yet another session, Gravitas Experts Speak session. And let me start by saying that I think we have all had this experience of having read something interesting, something useful, something that we thought would be really great if we are able to incorporate in our life. And we write it down. We started with Gutso, but after a few days and a couple of months down the line, in fact, when you look back at your diary and you realize that you have, uh, proverbially, you have fallen off the wagon and you have not been able to follow through on your commitment. I'm sure each one of us can relate with something like that. And I'm talking about creating habits. We all know that creating rituals and habits is one of the fastest way to success, to create a life that we like to do. Unfortunately, sometimes we are not able to do that. So why is it that? And to answer that question, today I am talking to a dear friend, an executive coach, a facilitator, and above everything else, he's a great storyteller. I'm talking about Prakash Nair. Welcome back to this session, Prakash. Wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much, Rajiv. And yes, thrilled and excited to be back on Expert Speak with Gravitas.
Thank you so much. So let me just dive right into it, Prakash. I'm talking of atomic habits. The last time that we discussed, and you said that atomic habits is a great framework for us to be able to build, habits and rituals. So can you just tell us about it? Let me just start by asking this question: why atomic habits?
Thank you, Rajiv. Yes, I think that's where, that's a good place to start. So I always say that for many people, in the months of February and March, especially, there is one question that they all like to avoid. They find it quite difficult, in fact, painful. The question is, how's your New Year resolution coming on? All right. Invariably, the answer is I don't want to talk about it. Right. Research shows that about between 67 to 80% of people don't follow up on their New Year resolutions as early as March itself.
Yep.
So that is one of the key things. Why New Year's? It's like a new blank slate, and we all have this wonderful wish, like on New Year's we are all going to become different people and we start. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. So having looked at it in that manner, now why is that we have such a high failure rate? Is where I started reading more about it, wanting to become better, and I've understood that one, the importance of habits. Let's take bad habits: junk food, poor sleep, sedentary lifestyle, not saving money, overspending, all that. They lead us down a slippery road to a miserable existence. Quality of life is really bad. On the other
Right.
hand, good habits, you know, proper sleep, a good diet, exercise, fitter, healthier selves, and great habits lead to much greater success. So it shows also, research also shows us that 40 to 45% of what we do on a daily basis habitual.
Right. Right.
So, one, 40 to 45% of what we do is habitual. Secondly, what we do defines our lives. That is why the changing of habits is so important and critical. And
Sorry, can you repeat that? You have some noisy neighbors. We didn't get the
yes,
last part.
sorry, it is plain going over it. So what it was, 40 to 45% of what we do is habitual. Imagine the amount of time that is spent. And secondly, the habits define our lives. So it's
Right.
something that all of us should take very seriously, and very importantly, treat it as a priority in our lives. So what I really liked about Atomic Habits is that James Clear, the author, completely upturns one widely held and popular belief. That is,
Right.
any change, we need to think big and take huge, massive action. But that is not the case. He says
Mm.
that real change comes from small actions. And he has put in some lovely examples for that, Rajiv. So that is why I wanted to talk about atomic habits, and particularly talk about one aspect of atomic habits which James Clear elucidates in his book.
Right. Great. So this is, I think, so we have started off well. You are saying that you want to make big change, but it has to start as a small, with a small action. Right. Great. I think that's a good starting point. We will get into that one. But before we get into that, I want to ask you, what is the reason that we fail? I mean, do you have an explanation, psychological theory? What exactly is it? Because it is so widespread. I think every single person that we talk to has had this experience of starting something. Our intent is good. There is always that knowing doing gap which is there. So why does it happen?
Absolutely, Raj. Uh, the most important thing, which is that if you look at it, see how our habits take over our life. All right. When we actually set out to form a new habit, we are successful at first. But after some time, we find it difficult to sustain and continue with that. And that is where the biggest challenge, especially when we want to eliminate these bad ones, we seem to, slip back. So
Right.
making that change is fine, but sustaining it seems to be the bigger challenge. And there is research, 21 days, 90 days, and you have to establish. So what we have come to know is that establishing the habit is critical, and that is where the biggest challenge lies. And what James Clear says, and James Clear delves into a lot of neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, biology, and so on. And he comes up with these two clear things as to why most of the time we are not able to make the change stick or work. One is we try to change the wrong things, and second is we try to change it in the wrong way.
When you say wrong things, what do you mean?
All right. So let's look at this first part. Let's consider the change which we want to do, Rajiv, and look at it as three layers. Now, the first layer, if we were to consider, imagine these layers as the layers of an onion. The outermost layer is changing our outcomes, which is basically I want to become a writer, so I become an established writer. I am this healthier, fitter person. I am this financially secure and responsible person. That's the outcome we want, and that's where we start. Most of our goals are associated with this outcome. Now, the second one is that changing our processes, which is where the habits come into play. Now, I want to become a fitter person, so I decide to exercise. I want to become a successful writer, I decide to write every day or write consistently. I want to become financially secure, I start saving in a regular manner. So, that is all the habits, the actions which we take. And again, that most of the time we do is that we associate the outcomes and we come to the habits. Now, the third layer, the innermost layer, is changing our identity. It is who we think we are, our beliefs, our views, our opinions, and our judgments about ourselves. And we all know, the inner critic, the negative talk, the imposter syndrome, the perfectionism. It is like who we look at ourselves in the mirror and who do we tell who we are. That is the three changes. Now, it's not that the levels, one is more important or the other.
Right.
The important thing is that the direction in which we do the change. Most of us start with the outcomes and then we try to influence our habits and then come to the identity. And that's why we feel what we need to do is change our identity first, which is closely linked to our habits, and thereby go to our outcomes.
That's a very very insightful part that you talked about. I think this is the key for this habit change that we have been discussing. And I remember the last time that we were talking about this, you did say the outcomes is the outer circle, and then the habit, and then the identity. And you had a great example to kind of uh, share how exactly does that work. Do you want to share that one with?
Yes, yes, Rajiv. I would certainly want to do that because it has such a powerful impact. This was one change I have been wanting to do for a long time, which is stop smoking. I used to smoke for over 20 years. And for over 10 years of that, I wanted to stop smoking. I tried so many things. Every year I would say on this day, New Year resolutions. I started hating New Year's only because of this failure rate I had. So tried everything, didn't work, got married, it became an issue for my wife. You're stinking, your health. I used to take frequent breaks from work. It was like I'd become a slave to this habit, and always focusing on the outcome. I'm going to be this fitter person, healthier person. I'm going to be, you know, not a person who's going running out and all that. Never succeeded. Will give up for some time, go back to it with a vengeance. One day, I came back from work, Raji, and noticed that my wife, my in-laws, with whom we are all staying together, were looking very upset, angry, and frustrated. Then I had to ask the question, "What's wrong?" When I asked the question, my wife snapped at me saying that our 4-year-old daughter had put a pen in her mouth and walked around pretending to smoke. And my wife and my in laws immediately told her, "Don't do that." Her answer was, "Papa does it." And they
Yeah.
had no answers. Yeah. When I heard this, that day I had 2 more cigarettes left in my pack. I smoked it. February 10th, 2009 is the last time I smoked. And
Wow.
that is when I realized what was, and I, did a lot of self-reflection. Said, why is that I struggled for 10 years and suddenly one day it changed? What was,
Yes.
because I wanted to make sure, like, I find the secret and, use it to make more and more changes. While I relied on that memory and that experience to make more changes, I never really understood the secret till I read Atomic Habits. And I
Right.
read this part, and then it struck me. What I did was, I did not look at the outcome, I looked at my identity. What sort of father was I? And what sort of father did I want to become?
Yeah.
And that is when they say, that
So
bulb
your
went off in a
identity,
head.
your identity as a father was the one that got challenged. Do I want to
Yes,
set that kind of an example for her? And if I'm doing this, what sort of a father am I? Right.
yes, absolutely,
Fantastic. Yeah.
absolutely.
So yeah. So this is something which is really powerful. That you need to look at what sort of a person you want to become and start from there, and then everything flows out from that. Okay. Okay. So that
Yes.
shift is required. So my what I mean, what my next question to you would be, how do you go about? I know about the intentional way of looking at things, right? When you are intentional about something, the change takes place or it happens or something. So how do you go about changing your identity? What are a couple of things that you can share with people to take the first step towards changing their identity?
Sure. So there is a popular saying. I think it was Brian Tracy who said it. First, we make our habits, then our habits make us. And what we need to look at is that what sort of person I am right now, and what is that I want to become. Because we cannot change our habits overnight, neither can we change our habits overnight. It's a process, it takes time.
So can you repeat that again? You said neither can you change your habits.
Habits overnight, nor can you change your identity overnight.
Right.
It takes time. And secondly, both of them are interlinked. Earlier I mentioned, one is the second layer and one is the innermost layer. However, the interplay between these two are very strong. That is why I said first we make our habits and then our habits make them. So Rajiv, if I were to ask you what is your strength and how do you know it's your strength, what would you rely on to justify your answer?
Interesting. So
Let's say, you say that you are a highly organized person.
right.
How
So
would you tell yourself?
my past experience, some reference, point of reference, which I can relate with and say that this is the reason why I believe this is a strong point for me. Or people having told me that I'm an organized person.
Exactly. We all
Hmm.
need proof that
Hmm.
this is who you are. So that proof can come with an asset. For example, let's say I have a very organized discipline base. So every day there's a list of to do things, prioritization, this, that. Very rarely do I miss things, I'm late and all that. When
Hmm.
I do that every day, I tell myself I'm a highly organized, highly disciplined person.
Right.
Or when I manage to save 20 to 30% of my income every month and I put some in investments and all, I tell myself I'm a financially sensible and responsible person.
Right.
So, however, at one point in time, I was not. So I had to start. So the starting point is the first question we need to ask ourselves, Rajiv, is that who do I want to become?
Correct. So this is a good one, which you gave an example of the financial. That I am a financially sensible person. So when you start a statement by saying I am, it's a state of
Yes.
being. I
Yes.
am I am being kind of a person that does or makes sensible decisions, because making sensible decisions is more of a behavior,
Yes.
right? That's an act. So
I
the mistake that we are making is that we try to tell ourselves saying that I'm going to save money or I'm going to be sensible in my decisions, where we are focusing on our behavior instead of focusing on our identity, which is the core of the change. Is that correct?
true. True.
Ah,
Absolutely, Rajiv. You hit the nail on the head. So a few
okay.
more example. The goal is not to read a book.
Right.
That's an outcome-based goal. The goal is to
Oh,
become
you
a
want to
reader.
become a leader.
The goal is not to run. The goal is to become a runner.
Yes. I think the penny is dropping now.
Yes. So when we do that and we decide on, who's the sort of person, we want to be. And, James Clear gives a very good example of a lady friend of his. The
Hmm.
lady, obviously, not in the right weight range or appropriate weight range for herself. And she felt, she had to lose some weights. And we all know losing weight is, quite a difficult proposition for many people, and it is one of the industries which churns out the highest number of fads and diets and so on every year. So
Right.
it's a huge challenge. And this lady, what she did was, instead of trying, she tried out all these fads and diets and all that, but more harmful consequences rather than any benefit. And whatever she lost, she put it on faster than she lost that. So after that, she decided to try out the new thing, which is said throughout the day, she whenever she used to make a decision, she asked herself, what would a healthy person do?
Right.
So she was going to make a breakfast herself. She would ask herself, what would a healthy person eat for breakfast?
Hmm.
When
Hmm,
she
hmm.
was feeling peckish and wanted to reach out for a snack, she would ask, what would a healthy person do? Would they snack? Or if they were to snack, what would they pick up?
Right.
And when she had that, inclination to sit down in front of the TV and binge watch or whatever, asking herself, what would a healthy person do? And go out and walk for 15 minutes, run for 15 minutes, and all that. So when she did this, constantly asking herself who she is and who she wants to become, she found that she could lose the weight. She lost 45 kgs in a single year
Wow. And that is
without.
by by being intentional. That's how you
Yes.
constantly remind yourself, and that this is not the kind of person who does it. And in
Yes.
that moment when you are making that decision, your identity, how shall I put it, your identity taps you on the shoulder and says,
More.
is this the kind of person you want to be? All right. Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what we have again seen, and I think each one of us have gone through, is that when we first try to make a change, we do start very well.
Yes.
The reason it doesn't start is that those one-off experiences or those few minor experiences, they
Hmm.
don't help us change our identity.
Hmm.
Now, one thing has to change. You have to start somewhere. You either
Right.
start telling yourself and then you start doing the habits. That is when the things start changing. So when I tell myself that I want to become a writer, then I should visualize myself as a writer. And during the day, I have to keep asking myself, what would a writer do?
Hmm.
What some of the most famous writers in the world, how do they run their day? I need to keep asking myself the question. When I start doing that, those habits come into play. After some time, we will find that the habits have established themselves.
So at this point, let me just ask you another question. In fact, I remember, you know, reading that also in a book, and he talks about uh, a 2 minute rule, that when we are trying to make that big change, right, and creating this identity, I think, I mean, if I were to zoom out and says that first of all, you should start by changing your identity rather than your habits. Okay, because
Yes.
that's the wrong thing. The right way is this one. So we have talked about what was the wrong thing, and then we also talked about what is the wrong way that we approach it, is by trying to kind of change the whole big piece, which sometimes that is the reason that we start with a lot of gusto, but then it peters off, right? So he said something about a 2 minute rule. What is that 2 minute rule? Can you just talk
So
about that?
linking back to the fact that we said, 45% of what we do on a daily basis is habitual.
Right.
Yeah. So every day, most of the time, what is happening is when something, a trigger happens, an external situation. Let's say I'm hungry. I'm
Hmm.
trying to change my habits, become fitter, healthier. But when I'm hungry, what I reach for is almost unconscious. It is a habit which is built into me. And if that snack is something which is unhealthy, fried stuff, and so
Hmm.
on, uh, I'm going to continue in that. But the 2 minute rule is all about sitting back, asking ourselves that question, and then deciding, yes, now that I want to become this new person, what
Right.
is that new habits which I want to inculcate, and what is the new actions which I want to take? So that is what is my perspective, Rajiv. Would love to hear your thoughts how the 2 minute rule worked for you.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, that's the this is very similar on that line. And what he said was that whatever habits that you want to change, there has to be a kind of 2 minute version of that. Something, some action that you can take that can be completed in less than 2 minutes. So his argument was that when you want to become that kind of a person, or a writer or something, the whole idea or the way that we think is I should sit down and write for 1 hour every day. Now,
Mhm.
we start off with that 1 hour vision in our head, and very soon we are not able to follow through simply because there is always something or the other which is coming in. And once you are not able to meet that commitment of 1 hour in your mind, you are breaking your own commitment, right? And with that, what happens is your self-esteem gets hit, that you can never follow through on something. And the minute you have that negative spiral coming in, and then that's when you just stop making an effort moving in that direction of changing your that new habit of becoming a writer. So what he talks about is that make a commitment, that make a small commitment. They said, okay, fine, instead of 1 hour, can I write for 2 minutes today?
Yes.
Right? Because then it becomes easier for you to follow through on that commitment. And I remember what he also talked about was that it's important for us to get into the habit of doing it first and then trying
And
to do it better
better.
later on, right?
Yes.
Because once that identity has been formed, that you have been doing, I'm sure you must, yeah, we all have that experience that once we have done something for 5, 6, 7 days which we have not done before, we really don't feel like breaking that commitment, or we don't feel like
Yes.
taking that change. And that
Yes.
kind of victorious thing keeps us going on, and that's how is probably the place where the roots of a new behavior or habit starts to take in,
True.
right?
True.
So that
True.
made a huge impact on the way that I was trying to inculcate certain new habits, and that's why I remembered. So
Yes.
great, wonderful. So
Yes.
yeah, let's recap here. That you said um, uh, creating habits is something really important, but unfortunately we don't follow through. And one of the reasons was that uh, we, uh, we we focus a lot more on our behaviors rather than on the identity, right? And
Yes.
for us to be able to change our identity or work on the identity, we have to become intentional, right?
Yes.
And tool for that is to be able to ask yourself that question:
Oh,
what is, yeah, what is that person, or the kind of, if I'm the kind of person who's a writer, what
yes.
does a writer do? What would that writer do? And that would kind of make you a little bit more conscious of your choices that you are making. Okay,
Yes.
and to be able to make sure that you follow through on your commitment, that we make a 2 minute version of the habit. So not to worry about whether I'm writing for 1 hour or not, but am I at least writing something today? Give yourself reason to celebrate of following through.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Brilliant, wonderful,
True.
excellent. So
Yeah.
this is
And
this.
and yeah, again, it goes back to the identity part. What you said about that 2 minute rule, and why it helps us is that when we don't write, and I made a commitment, don't write, as you very correctly said, low self-esteem, it
Mm,
attacks our identity again. And what we are telling ourselves is, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to be able to do it. That
right.
negative self-talk is what stops us from progressing further.
Yeah.
But
That's
as you very correctly and very articulately pointed out, is that when you say 2 minutes, it makes it much easier,
mm,
and thereby it helps us build a habit. And
mm.
another thing is that when you actually sit down for 2 minutes, you don't sit down for just for 2 minutes.
Yes.
You will find that you sit down for a much longer period of time. I know it goes on, probably you do it for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and it happens to me even till now. Every day I struggle to do exercise.
Right.
Uh, and I just tell myself, okay, I'm going to exercise for just 5 minutes, and I'm going to do only this one circuit.
Mm.
Almost every day, Rajiv, I tell myself 5 minutes, or rather 2 to 3 days a week when I'm tired, not slept well, and all that. But I find myself, I manage to put in about 20, 25 minutes
Right.
easily, and which is all I want to, do. So that works really powerfully.
Yeah. So, in fact, I again heard someone or read that, and I think this is so true, is that motivation comes once you get started.
Start.
It's not that you need to get motivated to start something, but
Yes.
if you were to find that strength of just making that beginning, then that feeds energy to that action, and you tend to kind of go beyond your expectations, and that
So
motivation comes into this picture. And this, I
true.
think, I have experienced so many times. I think in terms of, oh, okay, fine, I don't feel like going for a walk today, but then I
Yes.
realize, you know what? If I don't go for my walk this afternoon, I'm going to feel very lethargic, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to be productive, and I would struggle to do what I'm planning to do. All those thoughts, when they come, and say, okay, fine, let me just go out for 2 minutes. Let me just put on just my
Yes.
shoes and get out of the gate, and then I'll come back. And by the
Yes.
time you get to the gate and says, okay, fine, let me just make a short circuit rather than the full one. And almost every time you end up completing the entire circuit.
Sure, sure. So small actions, as James Clear said, and I'd like to share another powerful example with James Clear shares in this book, which is
Mm.
about British cycling, the governing body of professional cyclists in Britain. For
Right.
110 years, from 1893 till 2003, no British cyclist had ever won an Olympic gold. 110 years,
Wow.
nor a Tour de France, which is considered the pinnacle of racing. This one. In 2003, a coach named Dave Brailsford took over, and he believed in this aggregation of small gains, which is nothing but these small actions. He
Right.
believed that if you had to break down this act of riding a bike, everything which goes into riding a cycle, into the small actions, hundreds of small actions, and look at increasing most of them by 1%, you will find that there's a huge impact. And that is what they did. Very simple, striking examples are redesigning the seat of the bike, using a specific massage gel, using electrically heated shocks. Now, I shudder to think what would have happened if there's some sort of short circuit, but even that was the case. They went into such individual workouts. They painted the insides of all the vans which used to carry the cycles and the equipment white, only to make sure not a single speck of dust would be there, because the speck of dust would degrade the performance of the bikes.
Wow.
That's a level they went to. 2008, 5 years later, 60% 60% of all gold medals was won by British cyclists.
Wow.
In 2012, they set 9 Olympic records and 7 world records.
Wow.
From 2012 to 2017, 18, and 6 years, British cyclists won 5 out of 6 Tour de France titles. That's the power of small actions.
Wow, I think you have given a great example. I think it's very, very inspirational. So I'm taking away from this session is to focus on changing the identity, be
Yes.
intentional, and define the kind of person you want to become, because that is what is going to remind you to be, to consistently behave in a way that the kind of person does, and make a 2 minutes, ritual of whatever habit that you want to change, and then you continue to make those incremental changes over a period of time if you want to become.
Yes, yes,
Wow.
that's
Okay,
perfect.
great.
Yeah. So my
Well,
final word is that do two things. Ask yourself, who are you and who do you want to become?
mhm.
Take 2 minutes to quickly perform an action. That's what you should follow on a daily basis.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think that has been really well spent 30 minutes with you. And I've always maintained it's better to talk to wise people and learn from them rather than spending 4 hours reading a book. I'm not saying you should not read books, because this is where you
Right.
get those. But yes, there is no, this is basically a shortcut to learning something
Yes.
quickly when you talk to people. So thank you once again for coming on this talk show, Prakash, and we are going to make sure that we do and continue this talk in some other episode of the future, right? You have a great
Thank
day.
you, Rajiv, for
Thank
having me on the show and
you.
looking forward to many more such sessions.
Great,
Delightful
great.
talk.
Thank you so much, and thank you our viewers, and
Yes.
we will come back with another episode next Thursday here. Until then, bye bye.
See you. Bye bye.
Bye.